something called the Terrorist Surveillance Program.
Yeah, could you tell us a little bit more about that?
The Terrorist Surveillance Program was a secret program created by the Bush administration to circumvent the FISA court. So under
the court that, let's reiterate, the court that was put in place to create a set of provisions that would check and balance these secret organizations.
Right.
Okay.
So instead of now needing a warrant from the FISA court, the Bush administration had the Terrorist Surveillance Program, which gave them leeway to pretty much do whatever they wanted in terms of surveillance.
What does surveillance entail? Could you give us a couple examples about what types of surveillance activities the NSA was involved in, or still involved in, I guess?
For the
we don't
most
really
part,
know.
what they're talking about is phone taps, wiretaps, email, mostly email and telephone communication. At that point in time, the Bush administration, well, initially they denied it. And then they said, yes, it does exist, but it's not illegal. Their argument for it not being illegal is that they have the AUMF,
which stands for?
I actually cannot remember right now the whole, but it's pretty much
it's a pretty long acronym.
Yeah, it's a long acronym.
What do they do? More importantly, what do they do?
Well, it wasn't. It was just an act that was passed right after 9/11 that said that Bush didn't actually. You could take action with force, so long as it was against the terrorists. It was this like full-fledged movement towards protecting the nation, immediate action, catch the terrorists. Because it is true, when you look back on the records, you find out that had we had something like the Terrorist Surveillance Program in the beginning, we might have actually
been able to curtail the attack.
You know, we might have actually figured out some more stuff, and we might have actually captured some of the terrorists that could rent the planes and that were going through the training before it ever happened in the first place.
So that it's not that there's not there wasn't a need, or it still isn't a need for this type of legislation. It's just it's a scope issue,
right?
And it's a constitutional issue. I mean, it's
a constitutional issue because it also involves U.S. citizens. When now this day and age with email and the internet, it's not just about people in other countries that we're trying to tap into their lines. They're here.
Everyone is
on
a
our own
suspect,
turf.
essentially.
Right.
Right.
So there's Fourth Amendment issues because there's that fine line between protecting your right to privacy and then protecting the national security. There's First Amendment issues because there's that fine line between a chilling effect and keeping people from talking about controversial issues, which is something we're doing right now.
Right. What do you mean with a chilling effect?
A chilling effect is a term that we use that kind of describes when you pass a law that makes an act illegal, people will refrain from going anywhere near that area because they don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to get in trouble. So it becomes this whole category of things that you can't talk about, or you can't write about, or you can't read about.
Sounds very Gestapo to me. That's why we have so many, human rights organizations and activists like the ACLU who are strong proponents of limiting the scope of the Patriot Act and
the NSA's program,
right?
And the ACLU has had several court cases that they've brought. At this point in time, we've had a very hard time showing standing. Many of the cases haven't.
Who are they bringing? If you could just explain to us, who is the ACLU? Because you and I both know, but maybe not everyone else does. Who is the ACLU? What do they stand for? And who are they raising their objections to? Which court?
Well, the ACLU is a civil liberties group, and they stand for a whole mess of things, really.
The spectrum of human rights.
Yes,
right.
There's First Amendment, there's freedom of speech, and then there's also women's rights, and they go all down.
Discrimination issues.
Discrimination.
The entire gamut.
Yes. In this
of First and Fourth Amendment issues and many of the ones in between.
This is true. In this incident in particular, in this area, they pretty much have brought on these cases on behalf of people. Well, we don't know whose line has been tapped. We don't know for sure exactly what the NSA has even been doing.
The chilling effect.
The chilling effect on behalf of reporters, writers, anyone who's in contact with people abroad. There are many professors, journalists who are trying to contact other academics,
I really feel like it feels like back in the Cold War when people were blacklisted and red listed and...
Well, right, because as soon as you've had contact with somebody in Iraq or Afghanistan, you're on their radar.
A person of interest and potential
right.
suspect,
and now
right?
that gives them enough power to say, this isn't a Title III warrant where you're a criminal. We don't have to show probable cause that you've committed a crime. All we have to show is that you're an agent of a foreign power, that you're communicating with an agent of a foreign power, that you might be involved in some kind of terrorist activity. And then that gives them the right, according to them, to
we don't have any specific examples. I find that really hard to believe. That I mean, I'm sure the ACLU has them. Why haven't they been able to raise them more specifically?
They really don't have specific examples.
But how do you even know that all of these violations are going on?
Well, they know that, for instance, Verizon, AT&T, a lot of the big communications companies have admitted to cooperating with the FBI and the NSA. Handing over tons of information about
volumes, right?
Phone records, call logs, all kinds of data. And so, but the problem is that no one still really knows, because the NSA won't say what they're really doing and who they're really tracking or how even they're doing it.
In the name of national security.
In the name of national security, because if they were to divulge that information, then it would be pointless anyway.
Counterproductive to what they're trying to accomplish, which is secrecy.
Now, there is a possibility that the Bush administration is right and that they aren't breaking the law. It wouldn't be illegal for them to have the terrorist surveillance program, which sidesteps the FISA court and doesn't obtain a warrant in order to conduct electronic surveillance on anybody, if the way that they're doing it is by tapping cables underwater in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
But if they're going up to Jane Street or wherever, and
then it's a different right.
It's a whole different
because we don't know how, because we have no idea how they're actually conducting surveillance. They have a hard time fighting that fight.
It really sounds like a catch-22. So what are the opponents or the human rights organizations like the ACLU? What types of things have they been proposing besides disclosure?
Well, they had in the conference that we just had on the NSA wiretapping program, we had a man named Bob Atkinson who gave this whole very in-depth presentation, and he starts off the presentation by saying, I am not saying any of this is true. I don't know any of this for a fact. This is what we are all guessing at.
He had to start the whole conversation with the disclaimer, which basically
could
make the whole conversation irrelevant.
Right. So there's pretty much the ACLU's guess, which is they're tracking, they're using certain like connecting points within the U.S., mostly on the borders, and they're tracking that way. Also tapping into the Atlantic cables and the Pacific cables. And then there's the other guess where if they're just tapping into the cables outside of the United States, they aren't breaking the law. What they're doing is perfectly fine.
Pretty unlikely, though, that they just draw the line there, considering the breadth of the scope that the Bush administration has taken with regard to their your terrorist position post 9/11, which I think is
that's true.